if you're faced with that stark choice, should Israel go for a two-stage solution here?
To the question about negotiations, I think it's clear that Israel and Hamas are somewhat playing a game here. One week, one side accepts a deal that is partial deal, and then following a few weeks, a different side accepts it, and the other side is hesitant. It's unclear to me what is going on behind closed doors and why these things are not agreed in parallel. It's clear that the mediator countries are failing in their job to pressure the sides to agree to terms at the same time. Again, I believe that only a comprehensive deal should be on the table right now. All the hostages who are alive are a humanitarian case. All those who were murdered in captivity or killed, their bodies might disappear if they're not being brought home as soon as possible for burial. And in a way, the Prime Minister adopted the call of families of hostages that are asking for a comprehensive deal. However, it's clear that there are a lot of amendments to what a comprehensive deal means. And it's clear that some of the stipulations the Israeli government is putting will not be accepted by Hamas. What we need now is...
Sorry to dive in, but does that situation alarm you when so much is at stake for the families?
Yes, it alarms me a lot. We don't have time to lose. And the families took to the streets, many of them took to the streets this Sunday, alongside hundreds of thousands of Israelis, showing to both the government and the international community that we are doing what we can to pressure our elected officials. And what we need now is that the mediator countries pressure Hamas to agree to disarm and release all the hostages in one comprehensive deal.
Yes.
And however, time is of the essence, and if we can save 10 lives tomorrow, this needs to be done, and I call my Prime Minister to agree to that.
I've only got a minute left, so a brief twin thought. When was the last time you had proof of life of Omri? And do you think Benjamin Netanyahu is committed to a ceasefire hostage deal as opposed to now simply deciding on a military strategy?
The last time we received a proof of life was in late April, about a week after Omri's 38th birthday. It was a propaganda video showcasing him in a dire state in captivity. But at least we received a proof of life, seeing him alive, hearing him speaking. And we keep advocating for him, knowing that he's alive and we can bring him home to my nieces, Ronnie and Alma, my sister Lishai. I think the Prime Minister is committed to a hostage deal, but he has a lot of political pressure from the radical right that he introduced to the government in the first place that are preventing a deal. Ministers like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and they are the obstacle.
Moshe Lavi, we have to leave it there, but thank you once again for taking time to speak to us here on BBC News. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break. When we're back, we're here with more of today's headlines. Don't go away. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. The government braces itself for more legal challenges from councils in England that are looking to stop hotels being used to house asylum seekers. It follows yesterday's injunction granted by the High Court. We'll speak live in a moment to BBC Verify about the numbers of asylum seekers being housed in hotels and where exactly they are actually being held. Our other headlines: as Russia continues attacks on Ukraine, injuring at least 14 people, the UK has in the last hour announced new financial sanctions on crypto networks exploited by Russia. Moscow has hit back with retaliatory sanctions on British individuals. A former priest who led an evangelical movement in Sheffield in the 80s and 90s has been found guilty of 17 counts of indecent assault. A member of the Irish language rap group Kneecap appears in court over a terror charge and is bailed until next month. And we find out how AI recreated a woman's original Cockney accent after she lost her voice to a disease 25 years ago. Welcome back, and let's go straight back to our main story. A number of councils across England have said they will attempt legal action to stop asylum seekers from being housed in local hotels. The High Court granted an Essex District Council a temporary injunction yesterday, removing migrants from the Bell Hotel in Epping. The government says it is looking at a range of options to actually house people as it anticipates further legal challenges. Well, let's get more on this. Let's speak to Lucy Gilder from BBC Verify. And Lucy, you've been looking at this across the country. Start off by telling us just how many asylum seekers are currently in hotels.
About 32,000 asylum seekers were staying in UK hotels at the end of March this year, according to the latest Home Office figures. And this is just under a third of the 100,000 asylum seekers receiving support from the UK government. But this can entail support such as shorter-term accommodation, not just hotels, longer-term accommodation, and also financial assistance.
And in terms of those numbers then, over the years, how much has it changed, especially since we've seen a new government, a Labour government?
Yeah, the number of people in hotels is actually up since the election by about 3,000, but it's down compared to the same period last year and significantly down compared to the peak recorded in September 2023, when there was about 56,000 asylum seekers in hotels. And this is reflected in the number of hotels that are being used to accommodate asylum seekers. So in that peak period, about 400 hotels were used, but currently that's halved to about 200. And part of that decline is because of the fall in small boat crossings that we saw in 2023. But of course, we've seen that they are rising again this year. So far, they're the highest on record for this time of the year. And this matters because it could mean that more asylum seekers end up being housed in hotels and more hotels are open to accommodate them unless the Home Office finds alternative accommodation.
And the number of hotels has halved. It was around 400 under the Conservatives. They opened over 6 years. That is now, I think, 210. So that's the number of hotels being used. In terms of where people are being housed, take me through that.
Yeah, I think you can see in the chart that many of them are concentrated in hotels in London and in other parts of southeast England. And relative to population size, our analysis of Home Office figures shows that Hillingdon had the highest number of asylum seekers in hotels of all local authorities in the UK. And that chart is also significant because within that ranking is Broxbourne, and its council has recently said that it would also consider taking legal action, just like Epping, to try and block asylum seekers from being housed in hotels in its area.
Lucy, thanks very much for just going through some of that data. Let's talk to our political reporter, Simon Dedman, who's in Epping for us. And Simon, just start by telling me you've been talking to people there. What have they been saying to you?
Well, Matthew, this is an issue that really divides people in Epping, a town at the end of the London Underground in Essex. The use of the Bell Hotel to house asylum seekers. There are a lot of people who are concerned about having it on their doorstep, the safety of their children and their grandchildren. But also there are lots of other people that you speak to who frankly don't like the fact that Epping has been on the map for, as they see it, all the wrong reasons, having weeks of protests, some of which have led to violent disorder and 28 arrests. Well, here are some of the views of what people have been saying to me today after the council won an interim injunction to stop the Bell Hotel housing asylum seekers.
Personally, I think it's great news, and I hope it starts a ball rolling for a great unravelling of the situation we've got at the moment, where there seems to be a huge deluge of asylum seekers over here. You know, I can see their plight, I can see why there's the problem, but it just seems to be growing and growing and growing. It's getting hugely expensive. The taxpayers having to foot the bill.
I have a mixed reaction to it, because I think it's a good thing that the hotel's closing, because the attention that it's gotten recently has been negative for the town. I'm not a fan of the protests at all. I think it's not a full solution to the larger issue at hand, and I also think that in a way it kind of feels like certain people won, when I don't really feel like I want to reward people for their actions.
Well, the protests have been taking place twice a week here in Epping since last month. This month they have mostly been peaceful, but there were some where there was disorder last month. These protests were sparked by allegations that an asylum seeker committed sexual assault, including towards a teenage girl. That individual has been remanded in custody and is waiting court proceedings. And the issue of safety was one of the things that Epping Forest District Council made when it was trying to get this interim injunction to end to stop the use of the Bell Hotel housing asylum seekers. In particular, it raised concerns that schools are going to be back in a fortnight's time, and said that they and residents have concerns with 5 schools being within a kilometre radius of the hotel. And they also raised concerns over planning issues as well, saying that the hotel effectively is no longer being used as a hotel. But this, of course, is an interim injunction. There is expected to be a more detailed injunction in the autumn, where we'll be hearing a lot of the arguments that have been made, and by the company that owns the hotel once again in the courts.
And Simon, is it any clearer when those asylum seekers will be moved from the hotel and actually where they will actually end up?
Well, this is in the Home Office's court now. They have basically 3.5 weeks until 4 p.m. on the 12th of September to move the asylum seekers to alternative accommodation. We heard earlier from the Home Office minister, who was saying that other arrangements would be put in place, but we don't know exactly where. The Home Office yesterday tried to get involved in the proceedings that were taking place in the High Court, but were turned down by the judge, in part because they got involved at a late stage. And one of the concerns that was raised by the Home Secretary's barrister was that there could be further legal action to come. And we have heard that the neighbouring authority here to Epping Forest District Council, that of Broxbourne in Hertfordshire, is looking into potentially taking legal action similar to what the local council has done here about a hotel that's housing asylum seekers within its area. But there are others, like South Norfolk, which has said it will not be looking to take an injunction. It's in discussions with the Home Office instead about a hotel within its council area. But certainly there are concerns that there could be further cases to come, and the issue for the Home Office of where it houses asylum seekers whilst they are being processed.
Simon, thanks very much. Thank you. Now, a member of the Irish language rap group Kneecap has been granted unconditional bail and ordered to appear for a third time at Westminster Magistrates Court in 5 weeks' time. Liam O'Honey, who performs under the stage name Okara, is accused of displaying a flag in support of Hezbollah at a gig in London in November last year, and was charged with allegedly supporting a proscribed terror organisation. The 27-year-old denies the charge and claims the case is political. The case has been adjourned until next month. Well, a large crowd of supporters, many with Palestinian flags, gathered outside of the court after appearing inside. Liam O'Honey addressed them.
I'll just say a few words here quickly. Thank you everybody for coming up. We appreciate it. Obviously it's great to see the support out here. We know this story is more than just about me. It's more than Kneecap. This is a story about Palestine. and us as a distraction from the real story. We know, unfortunately, this story will end up in the media today, while Israel commits genocide at the same time. So everybody, continue to speak about Palestine. Free Palestine. Thank you all for coming.
Well, those are the comments outside of the court. Israel rejects the allegation of genocide. The International Court of Justice has yet to rule on that case brought by South Africa. Well, our correspondent David Sillito was outside court a little earlier today. David, take us through it.
What you were seeing there was a very large crowd, a traffic-stopping crowd on a very busy road in London. There are a lot of supporters there for Kneecap there in Mohara, one of the three members of a Irish hip-hop trio, Kneecap. This is all about performance at the Kentish Town Forum in November of last year. The allegation about a display of a Hezbollah flag, the Lebanese militia group, a proscribed terrorist organisation. And the charge that Mohara faced, Liam O'Hanley, was that it was a breach of terror legislation. He denies it. In court today, it was essentially a long technical debate about when that charge was actually brought. Had it gone over the 6-month limit? Both sides 2 or 3 hours in court, and a decision at the end, well, it will be deferred until the 26th of September. So we wait to find out whether or not this case will continue at this next hearing.
David Sillito, thanks very much. We're going to take a short break around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News. Straight to breaking news, because in the last few minutes, a former priest who led an evangelical movement in Sheffield in the 1980s and 90s has been found guilty of 17 counts of indecent assault. So let's go straight to our correspondent Ellie Price, who's outside of the court for us. And Ellie, tell us more.
Thank you, Matthew. Well, Chris Brain, who's 68, was found guilty, as you say, of 17 counts of indecent assault. Now, the jury were unable to find a verdict on 5 further counts, 4 more of indecent assault and 1 of rape. They will continue their deliberations tomorrow. Chris Brain was the founder of an influential church group, as you said, in the 80s and 90s called the 9 o'clock service. Now, the service at the time was hugely celebrated. It was lauded as the future of the Church of England in terms of the way it was attracting young people to the church, in the way that it brought together dance music, a sort of dance culture, multimedia displays as part of those church services. It was seen, as I say, as a way of bringing in new people. So it was very much celebrated even by church leaders at the time. But it all sort of ended in 1995 amid concerns about the leadership of Chris Brain, and 30 years on, today he's been held accountable in court, as I say, being found guilty of 17 counts of indecent assault. As I say, the case will continue because the jury will come back tomorrow to continue to consider further verdicts.
And I'm just looking at quotes from the prosecutor, who said that he sexually assaulted, quote, a staggering number of followers.
The details in this 8-week trial have been quite astonishing in terms of the number of women who had come forward, and the accusations made. As I say, at the time it was so hugely celebrated what he was doing, but the court heard that he was also guilty of brainwashing women, of grooming them into offering him sexual favours. They were told of something called a home-based group, which was a group of women from the congregation who were tasked with coming to his home to do cleaning, to do cooking, even to walk his dog. And then some other members of the congregation were asked to come to sometimes to put him to bed, and that might include massaging him. Now, there's those massages that have been, some of the indecent assault charges have been centred around those. As I say, plenty of detail over the last 8 weeks in this court, in the court of some of the details of what happened. On the surface of it in the 80s and 90s, as I say, something that was so popular, but under the surface of it, something really very dark.
And Ellie, as we were saying, he's been found guilty of these counts, but what was the defence here?
The defence from him was that that it was always consensual, that the women that he was asking for sexual favours, it was always consensual, that he never did anything that anybody didn't want him to do. And as I say, we heard so much about the charisma of the man. He was described even by church leaders as this sort of messianic figure that people wanted to follow, women and men in his congregation, that they were willing to do what he wanted to do. But as I say, as it became clear throughout the course of this case, the case was made that the charisma was something that, as I say, people wanted to follow, but there was a much darker side involved in all of it. His defence, as I say, was that it was all consensual. Of course, the court today found, at least on 17 counts, that was simply not the case. And as I say, the jury will continue to deliberate on a further 5 counts, one of which is a count of rape.
Ali Price there at the courthouse. Thanks for bringing us right up to date. Well, do head to the website. There is more detail about this case available there. But we are going to pause from all of today's news headlines for a moment or two. Take the next few minutes to catch up with the sports news of the day. Ben Croucher is here for us. And Ben, good afternoon.
Matthew, good afternoon to you. Lots of rugby union news to bring you in the men's and women's game. We'll come on to developments in Wales in just a moment. But before that, in the last couple of hours, England have named their starting 15 for the opening game of the Women's Rugby World Cup against the USA on Friday night in Sunderland. It is the same 15 that thrashed France in their final warm-up match. Zoe Aldcroft leads the side. Abby Ward starts alongside Moena Talling in the second row. Hannah Bottoman, Amy Cockayne and Maud Muir combining in the front row. There's a menacing looking backline as well. Jess Breach, Abby Down, Ellie Kildunn combined to score 18 tries in this year's Women's Six Nations. Well, amongst the replacements too, Emily Scarrett set to appear in her 5th Rugby World Cup, having made her debut the last time England hosted the tournament back in 2010.
It's really important not to focus or make it any bigger than what it is. It's already big. So we're the Red Roses. The girls have been given a role within the 23, and it's important that they own that role. Naturally, we're humans, so there's good nerves within the group, if you like, probably reflected in the training and understanding that what the tournament presents for us in terms of opportunities. So that's only natural, but ultimately, end of the day, again, it's to focus on yourselves and make sure that you own your role.
Well, elsewhere, the Wales Rugby Union has unveiled a controversial plan for the future of the sport in the country that could see the number of professional teams halved. Currently, there are 4 sides: Cardiff, Dragons, Scarlets and Ospreys. Cutting that to 2 is a radical step that is needed to save the game, according to the governing body in Wales. The game is under significant financial strain there. Reducing to 2 teams is considered the optimal choice. The WRU has not indicated their preferred locations for the clubs or names and insists that no decision has yet been made.
This is unashamedly about trying to take Wales back towards the top of world rugby and club rugby. It is about trying to win, and it is about trying to acknowledge that winning is not just about one element of a system, it's about the whole system working together. I think in that acknowledgement, it's possible to think in the short term about just fixing one element and throwing all our resources at that. But my personal view is that if we do that, we could be back in the same situation in a few years' time.
Well, the other big sports story around this Wednesday surrounds the Newcastle striker Alexander Isak and the transfer saga that threatens to develop into a civil war. He says the club have broken promises to him as he pushes for a move away from St James's Park. Liverpool made a bid for Isak worth around £110 million. That's $150 million. That was rejected earlier this summer. Isak hasn't trained with the squad during pre-season, is also left out of their Premier League opener at the weekend. His manager says it's up to him to change the situation. Well, on Tuesday night, he issued a statement saying the club has known my position for a long time. To act now as if these issues are only just emerging is misleading. When promises are broken and trust is lost, the relationship cannot continue. Well, the club have responded, saying that no commitment has ever been made by a club official that Alex can leave Newcastle United this summer. We have been clear that the conditions of a sale this summer have not transpired, and we do not foresee these conditions being met.
I've got no problem with him leaving. It's the way that he's leaving which affects me, because it's gone about it all the wrong way.
Personally, I think it's a bit of a disgrace. Gutted by the whole situation. But if he wants to go, he wants to go. Bit of greed involved, but pretty much gutted.
Well, I'd like to see him gone, because he'd never get his game for Newcastle. As long as our supporters are there, nah.
If he's not happy, just time for him to move on. We'll get somebody else in. If he's not happy, I will just let him go.
And you can read more on that story and plenty more besides on the BBC Sport website and app. Matthew.
Ben, thanks so much. Now, people living with type 2 diabetes should be given greater access to newer medicines, including weight loss drugs. That's according to the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. Treatment for millions of patients is being overhauled in what is being described as the biggest shake-up in decades, with the aim of moving from a one-size-fits-all to a more personalised approach. Here's Dominic Hughes.
The treatment of type 2 diabetes is about to get an overhaul. A one-size-fits-all approach is set to be replaced by more individualised treatment plans. The aim is to use new drugs, which could include weight loss medicines, that will help prevent many of the complications linked to type 2 diabetes, including heart failure, heart attacks and kidney problems.
We are now tailoring our recommendations according to a particular patient's needs and the problems that they may have. So, for example, if they have heart disease or kidney disease, or if they're overweight, our guidelines will be tailored to their particular condition. Our recommendations are really designed to reduce the complications of diabetes. We estimate that if our recommendations reach 90% of the people that they're intended to, then we'll save 22,000 lives in this country over the next 3 years.
Diabetes is a condition where your blood glucose is too high because your body can't produce enough effective insulin. In the UK, around 4.6 million people are living with the condition. Roughly 90% of them will have type 2 diabetes, often linked to weight, ethnicity, age or family history. And it's estimated that almost 1.3 million people in the UK are likely to have undiagnosed type 2 diabetes. The new guidelines also aim to tackle an uneven spread in how newer types of drugs are being prescribed. Research shows that women, older people, black patients and those living in more deprived areas often don't get equal access to these treatments. So these new guidelines build on an attempt by the NHS to reduce these types of health inequalities and to focus more on preventing ill health in the first place. And it's hoped they could eventually save many thousands of lives. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
Let's return to that story we brought you yesterday, because a 113-year-old church in the north of Sweden, well, it's now arrived at its new home after that 2-day journey, weighing about 672 tonnes. It was moved as a whole church in one go because of a risk from ground subsidence after more than a century of iron ore mining in the old city centre. The relocation attracted large crowds, with one culture strategist saying it's like history taking place in front of our eyes. So that whole church moved 5 kilometres in the space of 2 days. We're going to take a short break. I just want to show you the live pictures before we do, because another large protest there of families of hostages just having a march, as of course people wait to hear the official response from Israel to the latest Egyptian-Qatari proposal, the ceasefire and hostage proposal put forward that has been accepted by Hamas, but Israel yet to give a formal response with Benjamin Netanyahu saying all of the hostages have to be released in one go. The live pictures coming into us. We'll have more on that story and all the other headlines here in just a moment or two. You're watching BBC News. Live from London, this is BBC News. The government braces itself for more legal challenges from councils in England that are looking to stop hotels being used to house asylum seekers. As Russia continues its attacks on Ukraine, the UK has in the last hour announced new sanctions on crypto networks exploited by Moscow to avoid sanctions. A former priest who led an evangelical movement in Sheffield in the 1980s and 90s has been found guilty of 17 counts of indecent assault. And we'll find out how AI recreated a woman's original Cockney accent after she lost her voice to a disease 25 years ago. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. How to accommodate asylum seekers and deal with questions and concerns of local communities are issues being grappled with in many parts of the world. Well, some councils in England say they are now poised to take legal action to remove asylum seekers from hotels in their communities. It comes after the High Court granted a district council a temporary injunction to block asylum seekers from lodging at the Bell Hotel in Essex. That injunction came yesterday. Here's our political correspondent, Joe Pike.
Could Epping act as an inspiration, with more councils using the courts to close asylum hotels? Some opposition parties seem keen to encourage it.
All of our councils, as we speak, are studying, their legal teams are studying the transcript from this case and the precedent that it set. Our message is this, as Nigel said this morning, if you have a hotel, a migrant hotel near you, and you are concerned about safety, go and make your voices heard, peacefully protest. I want to emphasise and underscore peacefully protest. It clearly was a decisive factor with regards to this case.
But your councils don't all have planning and housing powers, do
Not
they?
all of them, but some of them do. Durham does, West Northamptonshire does.
Yesterday's court judgment has prompted a whole host of headaches here at the Home Office. There is now the prospect of further protests, which could put pressure on the police, more legal challenges, which could be very expensive for the government. Then there is the more immediate challenge of where to house what we think are 140 people who are currently living at the Bell Hotel in Epping.
We're looking at contingency options for where those people can be accommodated, but we've never thought that hotels were a long-term sustainable solution for accommodating asylum seekers. That's why the government made a very clear commitment that we're going to reduce to zero the number of hotels that are being used to accommodate asylum seekers.
The Conservatives want the government to make a commitment about where they house the Epping hotel migrants.
The illegal immigrants moved out of Epping should not be put into hotels, apartments or HMOs, and I'm calling today on the government to commit that that won't happen. There are alternatives available. The real solution is to deport all illegal immigrants upon arrival, and I'm calling on the government to hold an emergency cabinet meeting right now, just like they did over recognising Palestine a few weeks ago, to fix this crisis and put plans in place to deport all illegal immigrants as soon as they arrive.
Keir Starmer's commitment to smash the gangs and stop small boat arrivals does not yet seem to be paying off. And now the government has yet another hurdle to clear in its efforts to fix the immigration system. Joe Pike, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, Corinna Gander is the leader of Broxbourne Borough Council. She says her council is considering similar legal moves.
Here in Broxbourne, we have an asylum seeker hotel. We have been watching the process over in Epping very, very closely. They are going for the planning enforcement route. So we'll be looking at doing that here in Broxbourne. We're currently seeking some legal advice on how we can move forward potentially with doing that.
Are you sure it is a precedent what we saw yesterday? Because the circumstances in Epping are quite specific, an alleged planning breach, but which led to evidence harms. That was the quote that was used, and those harms were related to violent disorder.
Absolutely. So here in Broxbourne for the last 3 weeks, we have seen protests outside the Delta Marriott Hotel. These are growing in size every week. The next one will be this Friday. I expect to see that a lot larger now that the injunction has been given to Epping. So there's a lot of community unrest here. So very, very similar situation here in Broxbourne.
Well, it's not quite similar, is it? Because it is not violent protests, and that is what the court specifically talked about. Are you worried, though, that the unintended consequences here might well be that violence is actually imported to a place like yours, almost as an impetus to violence? That's clearly what the government has said they fear.
I would never condone any violence. I would only support a peaceful protest. I really do hope that we don't see that here in Broxbourne, but I am concerned around the tensions that we are experiencing.
So you're worried it is a possibility?
I don't know that we could rule that out.
In terms of the government's case, you will be familiar with what they've been saying over the last 24 hours. Do you have any sympathy with the government at all? They do have a legal obligation to look after people who are destitute, and the numbers of asylum seekers in hotels is coming down.
I agree that there needs to be an emergency cabinet meeting. I believe lots of local councils are going to be looking at doing what Epping have done and what we're looking at doing. So there needs to be a solution to this problem. This problem isn't going to be eased in any way. It's only going to get worse. So the government really do need to start having those serious conversations about protecting our borders and what's going to happen to the people in the hotels should they be closed down.
Well, that was Corinna Gander, who's the leader of Broxbourne Borough Council, talking to me a little earlier on today's programme. Let's speak live to Jackie Broadhead from the University of Oxford's Centre on Migration Policy and Society. She's done research on local authority migration and integration policy and housing. Thank you so much, Jackie, for being here with us. The government have a manifesto commitment to stop using hotel for asylum seekers by the end of this Parliament. Is there a danger now of this court ruling, if it is a precedent, of all of that having to be fast forwarded?
Well, I think obviously the fact that the government has committed to this means that they know that hotels aren't the right solution, and there's pretty broad agreement for that. They're very expensive, they're not good for the asylum seekers themselves, and they've proved to be flashpoints for the type of tensions that we've seen. So I think speeding up that process is not necessarily something that there would be great opposition to within government or anywhere else. The issue is what are the other options that are available in terms of other forms of accommodation or other types of solutions for the asylum seekers and reducing that asylum backlog?
As I said, you've done a lot of research on this. Where are most asylum seekers dispersed?
So that situation has really changed in the last few years. So it used to be that asylum seekers were dispersed predominantly to parts of the country that had lower accommodation costs and higher availability of accommodation. Since 2022, when the Home Office brought in something called full dispersal, that picture has changed. The reason for that was because those areas that had much higher levels of asylum seekers said that this was unfair and that they were bearing a kind of disproportionate burden. And the Home Office responded to that, and they asked each region of the UK to set a plan for asylum seekers and to commit to certain numbers that they would accept to take. And that has kind of evened up the amount of people in each region. However, at the same time, the numbers have also grown, partly as a consequence of the backlog and the lengthening amount of time that asylum seekers are waiting for a decision. And so that has meant that alongside dispersal accommodation, in terms of flats, houses of multiple occupation, the government has had to use post-COVID these contingency hotels.
In terms of where potentially those asylum seekers go now, take me through more of the options the government actually has and whose responsibility it actually is here.
Yes, so the Home Office is responsible for asylum accommodation. It's not the local authority who provides that. The Home Office commissions a number of private providers for dispersal accommodation, and then they work with providers who then commission hotels for that additional contingency accommodation. In terms of this specific group who the Home Office will need to move by the 12th of September, the Home Office does relatively regularly move people between different forms of accommodation. For example, when people first arrive, they're placed in initial temporary accommodation and then moved to that dispersal accommodation. Accommodation is offered on a no-choice basis to asylum seekers, so they don't have any choice where they're placed in the UK. So for the group of people in Epping, don't know particular details of what will happen to them, but I would imagine that they would be moved to another part of the asylum accommodation estate, presumably dispersal accommodation.
Jackie, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News. Thanks for your time. Well, let's turn from that to the war in Ukraine. In the last hour, the UK government has announced new sanctions on cryptocurrency networks being exploited by Russia to avoid sanctions. The US has announced similar measures. Moscow has hit back with retaliatory sanctions on 21 British and Western nationals. All of that comes as NATO military chiefs are meeting to work on security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of peace between Ukraine and Russia. There'll also be further talks hosted by the Pentagon later today. But Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has called any such discussions by Western powers without his country as a road to nowhere. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, officials say 14 people have been injured in multiple Russian strikes on a town in the northeastern Sumy region. Russia launched 15 drones in an assault in the early hours today. Well, let's turn to how realistic it is that a force might be sent to Ukraine to keep it safe from a further Russian attack in the coming weeks or months. How would it actually operate? Well, General Sir Richard Barrons was commander of Joint Force Command between 2013 and 2016. He spoke to BBC Radio about the multiple risks of European military involvement in Ukraine.
If you're going to deter, that means that should Russia, for example, fire a cruise missile into Ukraine, then in this case, a Royal Air Force aircraft must be prepared to shoot it down. And I don't think people will struggle with that. But the bigger question is, does it also shoot down the aircraft that's flying over Russia that released that missile, or shoot at the ground launcher that fired it? Because if you're not prepared to do that, you're not exercising any credible deterrence. But we need to be really clear, we're really not just talking about how to underpin a ceasefire in Ukraine. We're actually talking about how you reset the security relationship between Europe and Russia, and a Europe with much less US support. So these stakes are really high, really important, and there may be challenges, but they're probably going to have to be dealt with.
Well, I've been talking to Colonel Brendan Kearney, who's former Chief of Staff for US Marine Corps in Europe. I asked him if he agreed with General Sir Richard Barrons' sentiments.
Oh, I completely agree with him. I think you have to have all those type of things decided on before you actually implement putting boots on the ground in Ukraine, or essentially establishing a force that is going to operate maybe from outside Ukraine, particularly aviation assets, but they'll be operating over Ukraine. The rules of engagement are critical, and it's really just, it's complete fairness that those soldiers, airmen, Marines, Space Force from the countries that are participating, that they know what is expected of them, and they know what the parameters are when it comes to possible engaging of Russian forces or Russian assets.
Yes, because the role is crucial, because back in Bosnia, it was non-engagement. And so you saw around Srebrenica all sorts of atrocities with UN forces only nearby. So actually working out the role. And I was also looking at a quote earlier in the day from Lithuania's former foreign minister, who said, would we fight alongside Ukrainians against Russians if needed? If we can't answer that basic question, then Putin knows any talk of security guarantees is simply that, talk. So absolutely basic questions have to be answered, don't they?
You are exactly on spot when it comes to the questions you're answering or you're asking. And there needs to be answers developed so that whatever forces we put and are involved in this type of mission, that we go ahead and we protect those forces to the best of our ability and allow them to accomplish the mission. And certainly the last thing we want to do is have forces ostensibly assigned to this type of thing, and they prove to be completely ineffective, impotent. We can't do that. Just as you were talking about with the Balkans, we cannot revisit that disaster that took years to really get on track.
In the Balkans, there was a force of about 50,000. In terms of the geographic area here, eastern Ukraine, it is massive by comparison. So you're a military man, you will know these things. What sort of number comes to your mind that might be required?
Well, again, it depends on what the mission is going to be. And you could easily put a small number of troops into Ukraine to man radar and communications posts, things like that. If you decide that you want to actually have a tangible presence, put troops in defensive positions and things along those type of lines, you're talking in terms of tens of thousands. But again, the nations of Europe and the United States and Ukraine have to go ahead and decide exactly what level of force we want to put in, what the mission is going to be, and then effect a plan that will allow you to accomplish this. Absent that, it's kind of hypothetical. It's a dreamscape that we're dealing with, and that's not what we need to do when it comes to hopefully putting in something that is realistic, that the Russians will respect, and that, if called upon, can respond.
Well, let's speak live now to Dan Saber, who's defence editor of The Guardian. And thank you so much for joining us, because you're there in eastern Ukraine. You've been with Ukrainian soldiers over the last few days. I've been reading what you've been writing. How closely or otherwise have they been watching events both in Alaska and the White House?
Well, of course, people follow events, but perhaps not as closely minute by minute as you might think. And I think what you have to understand here is that for Ukrainian soldiers, the war is part of their everyday, and they will carry on fighting this war carry on fighting against the Russian invasion until the President Zelensky tells them it's time to stop. In that sense, perhaps the conflict has its own momentum, and it shows no sign of easing on the front line. Russian attacks continue, dozens every day, just in the section of the front that I'm in. Civilians are still being killed in shelling and so forth in villages in Donetsk Oblast, the very place that Vladimir Putin says that he would like to control, or says he believes is part of Russia. So you'll see from Ukrainian soldiers a real focus, if you like, on the job they see themselves doing, and also just a lot of cynicism really about Russian intentions. I don't think anyone really believes that Vladimir Putin is serious about peace. After all, it was Russia that launched the invasion, and Ukraine's been fighting Russia since 2014, since the episodes of the Crimea and the Donbass. So this is a long war as far as people are concerned, and they don't think it's going to end anytime soon.
I'm going to put a map onto the screen as you talk. And of course, those areas in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass, that are being fought over so hard. Just explain to people watching how vital they are for Ukraine's defence.
Well, it's something that soldiers sort of said to me, something that Commander of Ukrainian unit said to me yesterday, but it was something that President Zelensky said last week. And essentially what Vladimir Putin appears to want is to be given the rest of Donetsk province. It's about 9,000 square kilometers, about 30% of Donetsk. But much more importantly, it's got the key cities off Donetsk, Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, Kostyantynivka. And actually, Russia's really struggled to take urban centers so far in this war. And these cities are the most fortified in Ukraine. As I travel around, there are defensive lines, secondary trenches ready if needed, if the Russians maintain their advances. And these are the areas that Russia wants for free, if you like. And not only that, if you look beyond that, then there's really open countryside into the center of Ukraine and its key cities, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhia. And I think Ukrainian soldiers believe that this would open up the center of Ukraine, because what they think is that somewhere down the line, the Russians will go again and there'll be a future invasion. Perhaps not during President Trump's term, but at some point in the future. And that's why they think this area is so strategic and so important. It's the gateway to Ukraine and perhaps the gateway to Europe.
Dan, a twin final thought. Do those soldiers think they are winning or losing this war? And in terms of Donald Trump, they will have seen him pushing various talking points that Vladimir Putin has pushed and blaming Ukraine at different stages for this war. So when they watch him and see all of this being played out diplomatically, what are they saying to you about how they view the US president in all of this?
Well, no, Ukrainian soldiers absolutely do not think they've been defeated. They know the war is tough. They know they've lost a lot of comrades. They know that Russia has many more people, and it uses its soldiers much more like weapons. I mean, there are something like 1,000 Russian casualties every day, and a high proportion of those, several hundred, are actually killed, whereas Ukrainian losses are much, much smaller than that. But of course, Russia has a bigger population and more soldiers to throw at the problem. So look, they can see the map. They can see the maps. They know the reality. They know the reality on the ground. They know they're being pushed back, a few kilometers here, a few kilometers there, but very slowly. And they give up the ground they give up the ground very slowly. But this is not an army that's been defeated. This is not a country that's been defeated, and they don't see why they should act like they've been defeated, and they don't see why they should give up territory.
Dan Saber, great to talk to you, and thanks for joining us there from the front lines there in eastern Ukraine. Thanks so much. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to the Middle East because Israel has announced it'll call up around 60,000 reservists before a planned offensive to take Gaza City. A plan that was approved today by the country's defence minister will be put to the Security Cabinet later in the week. Well, call-up notices could be sent in the coming days, with a military official saying that most forces operating in the city will be active duty soldiers. Israeli Army radio said the military was preparing for a prolonged operation that will run into next year. Well, 1 million Palestinian residents could be ordered to leave once new shelters are set up in southern Gaza. The move puts more pressure on Hamas as mediators pushing for a ceasefire wait for an official Israeli response to their latest proposal. Senior officials report the government of Benjamin Netanyahu's stand is that he is calling for the release of all the hostages in one moment as opposed to two stages. Palestinians say intense bombing has already hit parts of Gaza City, with residents fleeing or trapped. Well, the International Committee of the Red Cross is warning of a catastrophic situation for both Gaza civilians and hostages if military activity in Gaza intensifies. In a statement posted on social media, the ICRC said with more than 80% of Gaza already impacted by evacuation orders, it is unimaginable that civilians could be compelled to move to an even smaller area. The Red Cross statement goes on to say further military operations would, in its words, only deepen the suffering, tear more families apart and threaten an irreversible humanitarian crisis. They added the lives of the hostages may also be put at risk. Well, let's speak to Mahmoud Rostom, who's a Palestinian journalist in Al-Mawasi. And thank you so much for being here with us. I mentioned right at the start there of the introduction, reservists being called up and what the Israeli military are saying. Give me an idea of what people there in Gaza are making of all of these incremental moves to a full-scale military operation to take Gaza City.
Well, thank you for hosting me today. Actually, thousands of Palestinians at the north of Gaza are preparing to leave the north to the southern side because they are afraid of what the Israeli part announced last days. Israel, as you know, they need to take control of all of Gaza City and send the civilians there to the south. And most of the civilians there are preparing to leave. But also, you know, as the negotiation table, as you know, there's an update after Hamas agreed the same Witkoff plan that it rejected several months ago. And now they are waiting for Netanyahu to accept it. You know, lots of Palestinians, most of them are waiting for that news, and they are full of hope that Netanyahu will accept it. But personally, I think it's near Netanyahu would reject it because we all know that it's not about Hamas. Israel fighting all the Palestinians. It's not about Hamas. If it's about Hamas, I think Netanyahu will accept it.
Well, let me ask you about the pictures we're seeing, because we're looking at people trying to access food. You were in Gaza City only a couple of days ago. How fearful are people of that Israeli military offensive? And also, in terms of the basics, food, water, what did you actually see?
Well, most of food are affordable right now. After the IDF allowed to enter the humanitarian aids to enter Gaza, which is good. Now the people are focusing on getting food, and at the beginning of the announcement of taking control of Gaza, they weren't afraid of it and they didn't give anything about it. But now they are afraid because now they ended the starvation and all the focus now on the evacuation. Now they are afraid of evacuating, and I think if this happened, I think we will have a new massacres in Gaza City.
Really, really briefly, if you could, you're there now in the south. In terms of the infrastructure there, because we're talking about perhaps 1 million people moving to where you are, what is it like? Really briefly, if you could.
Well, most of Al-Mawasi, most of people living in a tent, and there's no infrastructure. Let's say most of Khan Yunis is destroyed, and Al-Mawasi itself, before the war, it wasn't crowded. It was like a beach. The people goes there. There's no houses there, so there's no infrastructure. And going to the middle, going to the middle of Khan Yunis, which is now a red zone. Most of it are destroyed, and yeah.
I have to interrupt you, and apologies for that. We are out of time, but thanks for your time.